Likutei Sichos, Chelik Yutes, Volume 19, the Sicha for Chof Av. In this Sicha, the Rebbe would delve into a very interesting concept, a discussion about an established observance which happens to fall out on a Shabbos, and obviously is forbidden to be carried out on Shabbos. The question is, should it be postponed to Sunday or perhaps advanced to Friday? Now, just to familiarize ourselves with several concepts and personalities and ideas that are mentioned in this Sikha. First of all, Chof Av, the 20th of Av, marks the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's father, Hagoyin, Hamekubal, Hachosid, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Zatzal, who passed away as a result of his exile by the Soviet government for spreading Yiddishkeit in Almaty, and there he's where he's buried. A concept in halacha, a korban. Are you allowed to offer a korban on Shabbos? Well, the rule is that exclusively and only a korban tzibur, that is a mandatory communal offering, is allowed to be offered on Shabbos. A personal offering, especially a voluntary elective offering, is not allowed to be offered on Shabbos. It has to be offered either before or after Shabbos. Another thing, when it comes to vows, nidorim, one makes a vow. The specifics and the ramifications of the vow are established based on what the common person has in mind, or what that particular person had in mind while pledging that vow. In other words, while obligating themselves by that vow. Now let's go to some personalities in this Sikha. The Rif. The Rif is Rabbeinu Yitzchak Alfasi. You can always find it in the back of a Gemara. Any particular Masechta, when you flip the pages, you will suddenly see a group of pages, almost like another tractate. It looks very similar to the Gemara, has the same page, so to speak, the same imagery as the Gemara, the same layout, that is. It has a text, and then around it has a Rashi, and sometimes even other Mefarshim, B'Tosfos, or what have you. Now, what is this Rif? The Rif is basically a synopsis that was written by Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, with the conclusions of the Gemara. That means he doesn't quote all the back and forth, all the discussions, all the debates. Rather, he only quotes the actual words of the Gemara that are pertaining to the halacha as he sees it. Now, on the Rif, as I said, on the margin, you find a Pirush Rashi. Well, it's actually very debatable. Rashi himself did not write that Pirush. However, there's much debate as to who exactly compiled it, or is it authentic or not. But the bottom line is that typically you can see a correlation between the Rashi and the actual Gemara and the Rashi that's quoted in the Rif. In other words, whoever compiled it took it from the Rashi in the Gemara. Sometimes, however, it's not exactly the same, as we will see in the actual Sikha. However, in footnote number 8, in Ha'ara 8, the Rebbe makes the point that even though there's a debate about it, however, the fact is that whenever possible, we have to try to reconcile between these two, because perhaps maybe it did come from Rashi. So certainly it's always best, it's always preferable to reconcile the two. Another personality that's mentioned in the Sikha, the Rugged Shavar Goyen. This is the great genius, Rabbi Yosef Rosen, who was born in a city called Rogatchow. That's why he goes by that name, the Rogatchow Goyen. He was the Hasidic rabbi of the Rav of the Hasidic community in the city of Dvinsk. The Rebbe considers him one of the greatest Goyenim of all times, and to the extent that the Rebbe once expressed regarding his Goyenus, his genius in learning Torah and his style, a breakthrough style in learning Torah, that had he been in the time of the Tanoim, of the Mishnaic sages, perhaps he would have been one of the greatest then too, and enjoyed, so to speak, notoriety. So let's go into the Sikha itself. The Rebbe says, as discussed many times, regarding the 20th of Av, that this is one of the 9 times of, quote, the wood of the Kohanim and the people. What does this mean? Like the Gemara relates, that when the exiles came up from Bavel to rebuild and to establish the second Beis Hamikdash, they found that the lishka, the chambers where they had to store all the wood, were depleted, were empty. So there were several families that donated, that committed themselves to bring wood to provide the wood for the Mizbeach, for the continuous fire in the Mizbeach, and for the purpose of offering the korbanos from their own money, from their own account. And therefore, the Chachamim, the Rebbeim at the time established that those families should annually bring wood on that very same day when they initially, the first time, brought the wood. And for them, it's considered to be a yontif, that they offered a special korban. And to the extent, this was so important, to the extent that even if they come and they bring wood at the time when the wood chambers, the wood storage, as full of wood, there's enough wood, still they would prefer to take from their wood, this was so special, and use that on that given day for the offerings on the Mizbeach. Now, the Gemara Megillah, on Daf Hey Yomit Aleph, the Gemara says there in the Mishnah that what happens when Chof Av falls out on Shabbos, when of course you can't bring the korban, let alone they can't bring the wood, but they can't bring the korban because it's a personal korban. Then says the Gemara, Ma'acharim v'loy makdim. You postpone it and you don't advance it. You bring it on. They would have their celebration, the fulfillment of their special day on Sunday. And then the Mishnah also enumerates other several significant dates where, quote, you push it off and you don't advance it. What are those dates? Tisha B'Av, the Korban Chagiga, which was the festive offering, which was brought in conjunction with every korban, and the mitzvah of Hakel. Hakel is when the second day of Sukkot, on the year preceding Shemitah, when they would gather to Yerushalayim, and they would make a special dais, a special platform on which the king would stand and read the Torah to all the Yidden. Now, when it comes to these latter three, that is Tisha B'Av, Chagiga, and Hakel, the Gemara gives an explanation. The Gemara gives a reason. Why is it that you push it off, that you postpone it, and you don't advance it? Says the Gemara, when in regards to Tisha B'Av, it says, because Agdumei Puranius Lo Mekadmi. One does not advance calamity. And regarding Hakel and Chagiga, the Gemara says, Akati Lo Higiyas Man Chiyuvayu, that the time of their obligation has not yet arrived, and therefore, if you do it earlier, you haven't done the mitzvah. There's no obligation yet for it. And therefore, the Gemara says, these are the reasons why the Mishnah says you postpone it. But regarding the Chof Av, regarding the Korban Ha'etzim, that the Gemara does not give any reason. Now, Rashi does explain. However, there's a discrepancy between the Rashi that's brought down in the Gemara and the Rashi on the Rif. In the Gemara, Rashi says, quote, Akati lo'ati zman chiyuvayu. He quotes the words of the Gemara that the time of their obligation has not yet arrived. And he says, if you're going to advance it, then you're not going to fulfill the obligation. And therefore, he says that since they have an established time, it's like a neder, it's like a vow. And therefore, if you're going to bring it earlier, you haven't fulfilled your vow, because the obligation of the vow has not yet come. So therefore, if you bring it on Friday and the 19th of Av, it's not going to work. So in other words, Rashi is establishing that the reason why, by the korban of the Eitzim, why you don't advance it, why you don't bring it earlier, is because, quote, the obligation has not yet arrived. However, in the Rif, the Rashi that appears in the Rif over there, he says, quote, you postpone it till after Shabbos. Why? Because the time of Erev Shabbos, meaning Friday, still belongs to the prior family, the family that brought it last week. And, quote, they do not wish that their time should be encroached upon, and somebody else should go bring wood while it's still their time. And therefore, says Rashi, you push it off. So according to this, it comes out, it would seem, theoretically, that if you can go consult with them and ask them their permission, perhaps, if they concede, then you would be allowed to bring it on Friday. So that really raises the question, how come the Mishnah establishes as a fact that you can never do it earlier? Now you see clearly the discrepancy. Just to summarize, according to the Rashi, the Gemara, the reason is because the obligation has not yet arrived. According to the way Rashi seems to explain it in the Rif, it comes out that the reason is because they don't want to be encroached upon. But that's otherwise, theoretically, the obligation could be done earlier. That's what it seems Rashi is saying. Okay? Says Rebbe, this has a ramification. This has an application in other types of instances. Where do you see that? In the Gemara Yerushalmi, there's a machlokes between two sages, two Amirayim. in the following type of instance. What happens if there is an account of tzedakah? The Gemara calls it a kis of tzedakah, literally a pocket of money of tzedakah. And there are poor people who need to be provided for, but there's no money there, it's depleted. So the question is, could the Gabbai, the treasurer, the person in charge, could they loan money to the account of tzedakah, provide for the needs of the poor, and now later when somebody pledges, somebody makes a neder to give tzedakah and fulfills their pledge by writing a check, by giving money to the tzedakah account, now could they take that money and pay back for what they've already given to the poor people? And one says you could do it, and the other one says you can't. Says it's not allowed. The rugged Shaver Goin, we mentioned already in the introduction who he is, he explains that the reason for the one who has the opinion that you're not allowed to do it is because of this Rashi that's in the Gemara. Remember, the Rashi in our Gemara says that you cannot advance and you cannot do it prior to when the obligation actually takes effect. So the Ragged Shava likens it to that, and he says, because when a person is giving tzedakah, he's making a vow. Well, pledge is a vow. And now, if you're going to give it for something that already occurred before, that means the mitzvah had already been fulfilled before, then it would come out that you fulfilled the mitzvah before the time has come, because the time hasn't come until you made the vow. That's the way the Ragged Shavar explains it. Okay, and he associates it with this Rashi. And according to this, it would come out, think about it, that if you were to consult the Rashi that's on the Rif, that says that it's only a matter of the people would not want to be encroached upon, then it would come out that perhaps you're allowed to. Now here you have a discrepancy between one Pirush Rashi and another Pirush Rashi. Says the Rebbe will explain this by means of focusing in on the actual words, the precise words that Rashi uses, that Rashi on the Rif. Remember those words, quote, and they don't want that anybody should encroach on their time. But if you think about it, let's analyze it. It doesn't seem to make sense. Who cares what they want? This whole observance of the Korban Ha'etzim was established by the Nevi'im. Call it the Chacham. It was established by a higher authority. And therefore, it makes sense that if there was a rationale to advance it, to do it earlier, then you're allowed to do it earlier without any consideration of what they want or what they don't want. In other words, why does that play a role? Doesn't seem to make sense. What is Rashi really saying? Says the Rebbe, that really, with these words we can appreciate that one Rashi is not negating the other, is not conflicting with the other, but rather this Rashi completes, or you can say complements, the Rashi in the Gemara. And here's how the Rebbe explains it. The obligation of the Korban Ha'etzim, this mitzvah, goes into the category of neder, of a vow. It's like they took upon themselves a vow, an observance. And therefore, what is most paramount in a neder? It's to know what was das hanoider, what was going through the mind of the person taking the vow while he was taking the vow. And since it is a common thing, it's an obvious thing, anybody knows, everybody realizes, that any given day on the calendar can fall out on various days of the week. Therefore, it's to be expected that at some point, Chof Av will fall out on a Shabbos. And therefore, it's obvious that when they took upon themselves this neder, in the time that they established it as an obligation, while the Nevi'im established this as their neder, as their commitment of observance, of annual observance, they took it upon themselves in such a manner, knowing that the other family would not want to be encroached upon. So melechatchila, they've made it in such a manner that never ever will it go prior to Chof Av, never ever will it be observed in advance of Chof Av, but rather that the established day is Chof Av, and if and when Chof Av falls on Shabbos, the neder was established in such a manner that they're going to postpone it, they're going to do it afterwards. So it comes out that the Rashi and the Rif is only filling in the blanks, is only explaining the words of the Rashi on the Gemara where he said that you cannot do it earlier because the time of the obligation has not yet come. And therefore, this is such an obvious thing, concludes the Rebbe, that the Gemara didn't even have to say it, because anybody who knows anything, basics about Nedarim, about the halachas of vows, knows and understands that you have to go by what was established, what was going through their minds, what was incorporated, so to speak, in their conscience while they were making the neder, while they were taking it upon themselves. So the Rebbe says that according to this, he actually maintains that you cannot use this Rashi in the Gemara as proof, as a reason for that machlokes regarding the tzedakah issue, if you recall, in the Yerushalmi, and he actually argues, he differs with the Rogatchover. Because the Rebbe says it's different. You cannot compare the two. It's like comparing oranges and apples. Over here, says the Rebbe, the way we just explained it, we just established it, is when they took upon themselves this observance. In other words, when they committed to this vow, they took into account that it's going to fall out on Chof, and therefore they established it in such a manner that if and when it falls out, Chof falls out on Shabbos, that is, that they're going to postpone it. Whereas when a person makes a commitment to give tzedakah, essentially making a vow, and gives it tzedakah, he is unaware of what took place in the offices of the tzedakah organization. He's not aware at all. He is not he can't have in mind, because he has no clue of what happened with the gabbai while the poor person came to him and he didn't have money and he laid out money for tzedakah, and therefore you can't compare the two. Says the Rebbe, from all this comes out something very interesting. A yard site that falls out on Shabbos. Now the minig is on a yard site. Everybody has the minig, the custom, to give tzedakah. It's just like almost like once someone's parent passes away, once someone establishes a yard site, it's like almost given as if you're taking upon yourself a vow that you're going to give extra tzedakah for the neshama on the day of the yard site. Others also even fast, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. Question is, what to do when the yard site falls out on a Shabbos? When the yard site falls out on a Shabbos, what do you do? According to the Rogatchover, the way we explained it before, it would come out that you have to postpone it. Because, quote, the neder was established to be on Shabbos, and therefore you can never do it before, you can only do it afterwards. Because he maintains, and he goes according to the Rashi in the Gemara, without the complementary filling in of the blanks as the Rebbe did with the Rashi that's in the Rif. However, the way we explained it, the way we established it, it comes out that you should do it on Friday. Why? Because any time one has accepted upon themselves a yard site, one is aware of the fact that that's not always going to fall out on the weekdays. One realizes, one knows it's such an obvious thing that it may at some point, sooner or later, fall out on the Shabbos. And therefore it's as if they took it into account, and as if they already have taken in the establishment, in the committal to this vow, that when and if it falls out on Shabbos, if and when it falls out on Shabbos, they're going to do it earlier, and therefore there's no issue. Note that this Sikha, the Rebbe said, on a Shabbos, on Chof Menachem of Tafshin Chof Zayin, Chof of fell out on Shabbos.